This is a Ben Frank Connection presentation.
What is going on, everybody? We are back for another episode of the ABJ Podcast, and we're live. We're back live. You've been watching all those pre-recorded interviews that have been piling up, and now we are back to the live interviews, and I couldn't be happier with today's guest. But before I bring him in, let's get the housekeeping done. If it's your first time watching, whether it be live on Facebook, YouTube, Twitch, or over on X, Twitter. Thank you and welcome to the ABJ Podcast. I am someone who likes to interview the independent arts, whether it be independent wrestling, which is mostly what I do, musicians or artists or podcasters or anything of the sorts. If you have a story, I want to hear it. So that's kind of the premise here. If just kind of doing a brand new mission statement, I guess you could say, to the podcast. If you want to check out previous content, I also do things like reviews as well as all forms of different things. So currently out right now is my first ever solo podcast I've ever done in 6 years. I've been doing this a long time, but I've always had a guest or a co-host. But I did my review of Blink-182 one more time. This Sunday, we're doing the history of the Bruiser and Crusher, where are two classic wrestlers. And then back on Tuesday, I'll be doing a review of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Mayhem. And then my next interview live will be next Thursday with the Brothers Grimm, a local tag team, the Brothers Gray, not Grimm, from the local Northeast wrestling scene. There is links and stuff below for my guest as well as myself. So we look forward to you guys going over and following them all on social media. But without further ado, let me bring in my guest, my buddy, Tim Mengle. What's going on, bud?
It's me. I'm here.
Probably the guy who I've had more of these conversations with than anyone in the history of my content creating experience.
I was thinking about that when you were doing that fun little the housekeeping up front, that I can't wait until, you know, you're a big successful podcaster and I can be like, I knew him from his interviews with Everyday People podcast days.
I was on it a record four or five times.
I think it was 4 on the thing, and then once on the Not Cool in High School, which I always feel like I didn't do a good job on.
Well, then maybe we have to run it back. Do you come back on the new and Not Cool in High School and we talk a movie or comic books or something?
Yeah, whatever.
We should do that. I'm really excited to bring that back because I do miss. So you're someone who's been around since pre-ABJ, like the Not Cool in High Schools, the Bangin' Beers, and then the Truth Behind Illusions, which I don't think I'll bring back. And then what was the other one? I'm at Tornado Tag, but you're not a pro wrestling guy. But yeah, all that stuff has been out there. Like I said, we did the Not Cool in High School thing, but mostly the interviews of Everyday People. I've had your mom on. I've had you on. We
did do one with the three of us. Right.
Yeah.
So maybe I was on 5 times. Oh man!
But then you were also, I feel like you were on a Bangin' Beers. I feel like everyone made one appearance on Bangin' Beers. Maybe you didn't, but also you.
I think you're right, because I remember it might have been the first time that you guys got something shipped to you.
Yes, that's like that.
That's ringing a bell to me. Or maybe it was before we went on a podcast. You gave me some beer that was sent to you.
That's possible too.
I also think that might be what it is.
Probably. The first time I ever been termed cross-faced has been with you. Cross-faded. Cross-face is a wrestling move. Cross-faded. Yeah. Where I got drunk and then I was new to the medical marijuana game, and then me and you smoked and I got dumb high. And I just remember being like, I don't think I ever went back and watched it, but we would do these like 2-3 hour podcasts about nothing, but they were amazing and they were gems to me. Links below for interviews with Everyday People. It's all there. It was something I worked on for about 5-6 years before I started this podcast. But like, yeah, man, we have that connection. You're someone like we met. It was weird because like we were two people that were in the local area, and then I started doing my thing, and then people were like, yo, there's something different about you. I like the way you conduct yourself. You would be a perfect match to be friends with this person. So like our friend group met us, and then we're like, these two need to come together because I feel like they would be buddies. and they were right because that's kind of how we met. And I ever since then, man, you're just always been a really good support for me, a good someone like if I'm struggling with something, you're going to help me. You're always someone like you keep me very grounded as a human. Like when I get those moments where I want to revert back to old me and be in the boat I'm in, you are someone I will actively reach out to and be like, hey man, can I just talk to you or even just not even tell you my problems, just listen to you, because your demeanor and the energy and aura you bring, it mellows me out. And I that's something I really cherish about our friendship.
That's just contact high. I think that's what
It's
that is. A lot of people tell me that, and I imagine that that's probably just what it is. But I appreciate that, bud, and I feel the same way back. And I think the key link between us is the appreciation for conversation, and just being able to find somebody who has the ability to, or at least in theory, likes the idea of conversing.
Yes.
And I'm an introvert kind of by nature, but I do find humans intensely curious like you do. Yeah, and so just the ability to articulate one's inner world is like infinitely curious to me, because I feel like it's the thing that we're most aware of, but the thing that we have the hardest time articulating.
Yeah.
Right?
Totally. I totally agree.
You're fully aware of this inner, not fully because you have a subconscious, but like for the most part, you're like, you know what's going on, but then the ability to articulate it, even like willingly articulate it, so you have the idea of first being able to like, I want to express myself. You have to go over that barrier, and then you have to have the words to do so. So like true conversation is like, it's like, I don't want to say it's difficult, but it's like something that it's a skill that needs to be learned, like in a video game, it would be like something that builds up over time. Yeah. Speech.
Speech level 10.
I just finished playing not finished. I'm sorry. I got to the end of the main story for Red Dead Redemption 2.
Never killing it.
Before. Yeah.
Only been 4 years.
Yeah, dude, I'm late to the game on everything, and I always have been. So like,
I'm kind of the same boat.
I got a N64 like way after I think it was cool. I got a PlayStation 2 kind of in the middle of its lifespan, and then like no video games until no video games systems until the Nintendo Switch a couple months after it came out.
And then you bought the Switch and played retro games.
Yeah.
You're like, so, I'm playing Super Nintendo again.
So I'm very proud of myself. Well, now I mostly just play handheld emulators. I wish I would have brought mine up.
Oh yeah, you showed me that at Pilgrim the one night.
Yeah, because I just bring it to the bar because it's my favorite thing. Because I'm like, I really like, this is a little treat for me. I love when there's a local show that I'm not on and I'm not hosting. I love to just go out to them, with it. It like again, this is a little treat for me. I love it when my partner comes out and like there's a lot of people there, but I love going out solo and then just sitting there with a beer and my little emulator and just playing old games and just listening to some band.
Yeah, that's a good moment. Pilgrim is kind of the same thing for me, but they have wrestling on the TV, so that I can drink beer and then watch wrestling and hear live music. And even if I don't speak a word to anybody, I just love being around the people that are in there, and I have all of my favorite things at one time. It's like it's beautiful. I absolutely love it,
dude. I want this on record. I love live music so much. I don't know if that's ever apparent, but I don't like going to like big concerts, and I've also said that on record before, but I'm just such a fan of like going to like a dive bar or a brewery and just listening to some person like who's just, trying,
Yeah.
I love that. And then just seeing,
you don't even have to be good. I just love the fact you're up there pouring your fucking heart out.
Yeah. And like, I just remember like just how stoked I was when I was like organizing my first shows when I was like 17, probably. Somewhere in that age, 17, 18, I was organizing my first shows. Like I played croc rock when I was still in high school. So like not the main stage, the lower stage. I won't say that like I was, that successful, but like
headlining Croc Rock at 14.
yeah, no. I think I might have told you this story before, but it's a new podcast, so I guess all stories are on the table.
Anything on the table? Yeah, anything on the table. Let's
I was in high school and I was in gym class, and I got a call on my flip cell phone from a promoter at the Croc Rock, and we were outside like going to like run, and I ran behind some dumpsters, and I took this phone call, and my gym teacher found me and like dragged me by my shirt away from like the dumpster, but I was still on the phone, so I was like, yeah, okay, so like load ins at 5, all right, we'll be there. And yeah, and then like he yelled at me for obviously doing whatever. I'm like, listen, my band is playing like the biggest venue in this area. Shouldn't you be proud of me? Why shouldn't have to be hiding this? Like you should be being like, yeah, good job.
Dude, if I was coaching something or being around something like, yo, I have a huge opportunity like for my art, I'd be like, go take that. Dude,
granted, I did just run away. I didn't say anything to him. Maybe if I would have said something to him, maybe he was worried about me, so that's fair. I'm not going to throw that guy under the bus, but yeah, that was my experience playing Croc Rock. And I also will say this, it's so much easier to get bigger shows when you're in a band. For some reason, I've been ripping solo I've been playing with a band for the last like year and a half, which has been fantastic. I still do like solo shows, but just being in a band has just so much more appeal to be like, you can promote a show around this. And that's so interesting to me, of just being able to see like people who start bands have a higher, like a quicker rate of being in front of a larger group of people. Part of that is because they're playing with other bands. So instead of having 4 solo acts trying to get people to come out, you have 4 bands that have 3 people minimum in them, like trying to get people to come out. Like minimum is that might be my favorite thing I've ever said. But yeah, minimum Mengle. Yeah, but you know what I mean? It's just like it's like inherently like brings in more numbers.
Yeah.
And so it's just, I don't know.
I had one take at a booking a show, and I just got by, and I said, I'll never do that again.
Yeah, but I mean, you shot for the moon. It was a very big thing. If you just hosted like 4 shows that like,
well, the thing was, it was supposed to be a small thing, and then it blew up because it was like, all right, well, what if we just did like someone's backyard and played beer pong, and then beer pong turned into, what if we got a venue, and then it was like, what if we do this? And I was like, all right, cool. And then I get a phone call, be like, bro, we're trying to do our album release party, and you have this event going, and no one's gonna come to our album release party. I was like, you want to join? And I was just like, now we have a national act in our stupid, like, it was wild. I don't know how it worked, but it somehow did. But it was a time.
I mean, hats off to you. That's honestly bigger than anything I've ever organized. It was so stressful. It was the scariest. Yeah, it was really bad. But real quick, let's just kind of rewind, because we are going to be way off the rails, and none of this is going to make sense. And I hope it's good for people to listen to. But I'm going to be completely honest. I love you all. I don't care, because I'm happy for this conversation, because I've been away for a couple months, away from all my friends. And this is a conversation I need. This is for me. I might even cry this podcast. I don't know where this is going. Oh, man, I'm not going to upset you that bad, I hope.
No, I'm just saying. I'm just saying that's how much of I look up to you. I look up to you, or I cherish your friendship. But let's kind of rewind real quick, and just for the people out there, who are you? What do you do? What are some of your arts and some of your passions? And why are we here today? Like, if people were just tuning in and they didn't hear that first 15 minutes of us rambling, what's the general consensus? Who is Tim Mengle? Or Timy Mengle?
Somebody who's very conflicted about his name. I'll tell you that much right off the bat. Anyways, I am a folk singer. I think first, like above everything else. I have a couple books of poetry out, which was kind of really how we got to know each other, because that was part of one of our first conversations. Was our second conversation was promoting my second book, When the Soul Meets Itself.
And you had me host the event that day. which was really cool. It was my first time ever hosting anything.
Yeah, I mean, well, yeah, look at that. I set you off on a, now look at you.
I'm hosting shit everywhere.
Yeah, I do. I also host my own podcast, and it's about comic books. I don't know if you can tell, but I like comic books. I'm and more so than that, I am a fan of stories. I'm
Yeah.
somebody who has a deep appreciation for the the tales that we tell ourselves, whether that be in trade paperback form or in holy books. I'm somebody who is deeply interested in all of these things, and just, I mean, again, the human experience of just however we ended up here, we're these people that were on this floating rock out in the middle of infinity, and you know we have this ability to tell about our experience here, and to share that with people, and I think that that's incredibly important and incredibly special.
Yeah,
See,
and you used to have a podcast as well. It was more of a religious podcast, and you had me on as a guest, which I think it's notoriously known I'm definitely not a religious person. And even though we're polar opposites in that, that has been a huge part of our conversation of, hey, even though we have completely different beliefs on a spiritual level, we both still want the same things in life and respect that. And I think that's a cool thing about our friendship as well.
well, I think for me, like, fundamentally, I think that people forget this, most importantly, like spiritual people, quote unquote, that spirituality is about being human. It's
Mhm.
not about transcending humanity. And I think a lot of people think that it is, but I think that it's about being human. I come from a Christian background, and for me, that's my interpretation of the world. I now notice there, I didn't say I was a Christian. I just said that that's my background, and that's kind of the world, the way that I see the supernatural, or like the theological uh, foundations of reality. And a lot of people have different interpretations of that, and that's fine. And it's just the worldview that they were brought in up, and it's their interpretation of the reality that they're experiencing. And again, that we need tools and abilities to articulate ourselves, and that's where these religious figures and myths come in to kind of fill in that void of being able to speak and articulate, the deeper truths of reality. um yeah, all that to be said, the reason that I say that spirituality is about being human is because of Christ being a figure that becomes incarnated, and it becomes a human being, and that kind of being the mitzvah, or the glory of like what's happening with him. It's not this being that, you know they it's so interesting that the gospels doesn't focus on his resurrected life. It focuses on his human's life.
Yeah.
That would be the most interesting thing. We don't really have that many stories of Jesus post resurrection, and especially not many where he talks. He mostly just shows up, and he's just like, yo, hey guys, and then just kind of, goes on his way or whatever. It's very interesting. He doesn't hang out. He's just kind of just walking through. um yeah, and sorry, I just had this random thought. A lot of times when I watch podcasts and I
Yes.
hear when people start talking about the Bible, it's so fun for me because I studied biblical, how do you say this? I went to college for biblical studies. Clearly I didn't go for English, but
It was
so,
all in
like,
Arabic.
it's funny when people like talk about the Bible, and then they'll tell a story, or like they'll quote something from somewhere, and I'll be like, that's not in the Bible. And it's
Yeah.
just so interesting to just be
You know
like,
where I love to hear the Bible on when I turn on Fox News and they try to quote the Bible, and I'm like, you're way off.
oh, well,
Way
and
off.
like, I know, again, we're just gonna keep having stakes in the fire because that's kind of how we roll.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's
We're punk
just,
rock.
no one's using the Bible as a holy book. Like, no one's taking it and being I guess that's not true. I know great people who go to church and like whatever, and they read the Bible, and they understand that it's this book that's supposed to be transformative of them, that they would become more like the image of Christ. That is, I believe, kind of what that's trying to do, of being like, how do you become this way? And a lot of
Well,
people take
I
that.
feel like I'm way close, right? Like I have the hair, I have the beard. I just got to work on those abs. You know what I mean?
That's right. Here's what
Jesus
I'll
has
say.
some abs, baby.
Anytime that you think that you're close, the universe is just gonna bounce back at you and just be like, no,
Oh
you're not
yeah, it's
close
been
enough."
kicking me in the balls. Yeah,
Yeah.
I've been getting put down.
Not that I have to be like, Anthony, something's coming for you, but
I don't need any more. I need a break.
I know.
I tap out for now. Yeah.
Yeah.
But
So
you also put your money where your mouth is when it comes to your faith and your religion. Well, you don't have to go with the whole podcast on this story, right? But there's a chapter of your life that the new audience can hear. But you graduated high school, right? Did your
Mhm.
thing. We're into the Bible, into that lifestyle, into wanting to spread that message. You were down with the clown, as we would say. Like you were a juggalo of the Bible. You know what I mean? And you moved to a different country where
Mhm.
they don't even speak English to then teach them about the Bible. That is the craziest, especially coming from where we live in like Northeast Pennsylvania, coal region towns, where going to Philadelphia is like a once in a lifetime thing and it's only 3 hours away.
Yeah.
You traveled across the world to a place that is completely out of your comfort zone. Like that's insane to me. And that to me, that speaks a lot to who you are as a person as well, because that's a huge risk.
Well, thank you, man. I'm like the older I get and like just kind of I mean like flash forward to the end of the story, just talking about having a crisis of faith. But um I'm very happy that I'm somebody that, like you said, is dedicated, of like I'm going to live the life that I say that I believe, you know. And obviously I don't do very good at that, but in my worldview, people are allowed to make mistakes and people are
Give it a
allowed to
shot.
be, like to just be like, hey, like I'm trying. I think, and again, like the craziest thing is that like all you have to do is be seen genuinely trying and you get so much grace.
Yeah.
People really love that about other people of just being like, and I had this thought the other day of like people are so hell bent on self-improvement, and it's such an interesting thing because I'm like it's such a beautiful thing about us as a species of just this idea of like I do want to make myself better. And obviously there's like examples where people can like just turn, but like
Yeah.
there I feel like the general zeitgeist is like let's not be shitty, you know? And I
And we're
think
having a lot of people who just can't accomplish that.
I yeah, and like
Yeah.
every time that I think like it's it's so conflicting because obviously you see the crazy stuff on the internet and like how people act there, but then like in real life, nobody really does. I mean, we live in a kind of crazy area, so you do get like folks like that, but it's
Everyone is a superhero essentially in today's time, right? So like when you're on the internet, you have an alter ego, and a lot of people who they are on the internet sometimes aren't who they are in real life. But
Mhm.
then you do have people who've kind of figured that out to a better extent of like, yeah, who you get on the internet is exactly who you get in real life. And I think sometimes that stands out, but I think it's more comfortable when people put up that barrier of who they are that they can't portray while they're at work and do their thing. And like you go to work and then you come home and then who you are outside of work is really who's coming through the screen on social media, or vice versa. You're playing a
Yeah.
character on social media, but then in real life, you're a different person.
Dude, I think it's so interesting and it's like worrying. And I really don't want to like stay on this for forever, but like I think that my generation looks at like the previous generation, our parents' generation, and thinks of them as very narcissistic and
Yeah.
entitled. And then like everything that you do is on an account that has your name on it, that you've curated your likes and your what you don't want to see and what you do want to see, and it's you have to have a username that you use across all these things. And so like you're saying, like you have to build up this like persona. And for me, like I being a person that like is like artistically driven in like this day and age is a nightmare of just having
Yeah.
to do all this. Like you have to be the best promoter in the world while also being the best songwriter in the world. It's like every musician prior to 2016, 15, like like less than like 10 years ago, every musician in the world didn't have to worry about that. They just had to worry about being seen, and then they got big enough and somebody took care of all those things.
Yeah, every artist was like, okay, I got really fucking good at guitar. I can sing my balls off. So now I need to make money so I can pay myself to go to a studio and pay thousands of dollars to get myself recorded so I can then become the next step. And now every musician today is like, yeah, I record in my basement because I can't afford it, and I can go buy a microphone. Or like you said, you have to be a producer, you have to be a songwriter, you have to be the online promoter. Like you have to take all these hats on, and it's fucking hard.
Yeah, and I also think that music releases now are more of like it's, and I do like, again, somebody that loves comic books and the like Marvel movies being the reason that I read comic books. I think Marvel movies kind of ruined the entertainment industry insofar as the hype is now more important than the product.
Yeah.
And so how hyped can you get people? And I feel like I just see musicians of the mainstream variety just pumping out albums, and it's just like, well, where's the substance in this? It's like, well, the substance is that you were excited about it, and then you have it. And like, granted, there's a lot of good stuff, but there's just this weird obsession with hype that is like, just, it's put so much on like musicians. And then and even like a form of building hype is to just go silent, like Lorde, like Lorde doesn't ever post on social media because I follow Lorde for some reason. And she just like, doesn't have things. And then she'll come out and she'll be like, here's some stuff. And then she'll just go silent again. And it's like, yeah, that's a great way to do that. But you can't do that unless you've already kind of have a fan base,
Yeah.
And yeah. So I mean,
it's like, listen, if you want me to go away on social media and stop posting 14 times, just like and share my shit and help me get to my next stage so I can get to the point where I don't have to do it as much because I already built up the audience.
Right. But I mean, it's part of the grind, man. Like it's any success.
It's a good bit.
Any success story is like built on somebody just grinding with their teeth.
Sometimes, or it's just someone steps in shit. Like
yeah.
It's funny because it's like artists are like the metaphorical version of shit, right? So like every artist is out there trying to find that pile to step in so they can be like, I did everything I possibly can. I got good at everything. I'm trying my best. I'm just not getting to that next step. And then someone who's just like, I posted 3 times on like 3 years and I just got a deal. You're like, what? How the fuck did you get 1,000 plays on that piece of shit? You know what I mean? Like you're like you just ran like all that work, and then someone can just step in, and then vice versa. It goes both ways, and it's just that constant struggle. But kind of breaking away from like you now you're doing your content, right?
I just remembered we were talking about me being in Taiwan.
But you kind of wrapped that up quick. You said, listen, I chased that. And that could be like, listen, go back and listen to interviews every day with the people. But you go to the music life, you record a bunch of albums, you wrote some poetry books and then you kind of dove into that podcast realm with your first podcast. And now you're at your current podcast, and we can bounce around in between there. We could talk the music and stuff, but I'm trying to like just put a little thing. You're talking about movies and stuff. Your comic book now, your podcast now based on comic books. I can speak. Maybe we did a little before the show started. Is called Poolbox Pals, and it's you and your buddy who you can talk about. You and your pal. That you could talk about how you guys. That's the biggest
struggle on the show is to just constantly be like pal, because it's not something that we normally use. Yeah. But I think it's a fun sounding name because I think I came up with it. But yeah, it's
coined pal.
I think no, I coined Poolbox Pals.
Yeah,
pals. I think I don't know.
But you guys, how long has the podcast been around, and what is the general premise of Poolbox Pals?
So the podcast has probably been around for maybe over 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
So
you started Poolbox Pals around the same time I started ABJ Podcast.
So you started yours after ours, which is amazing because you have like almost 5 times the amount of followers that we do. And I mean, we just hit 200 subs. And I saw that you're almost at
1,000. I'm closing on 1,000. I'm 2 away from 930.
So like that's fantastic. Like and it's I know it's been a pain because you've been grinding that whole time while we've like again just been lollygagging. But again, you can see that in like those numbers, it's working for you. So I just want to encourage you with that and just be like, look, man, like we're people that like we will openly admit like we do it very casually and just being like this is a fun thing that we do.
I started
And
that way, and then I put too much time, effort, and money in, and now I can't go backwards. But I'm getting better at making it like, okay, I have to do things differently now for my personal life, and then also still do this because this is a muscle memory thing. Like, I don't know if I can turn off a camera and not do it at least one day a week. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
yeah.
So, anyways, I didn't really answer your question. Our podcast is about comic books. So, every week, if you're not too familiar with the comic book world, every Wednesday, new issues are released, and that's the day that we do our podcast. We go to the comic book store, we pick up some new issues, and then, we just show what we got that week to each other and talk about the comics that we read in the last week. Sometimes there's some overlap between what we read and then. Sometimes there's not. So it's just, a lot of going back and forth or just spending a lot of time just talking about one book. And then every 5 episodes or so, we try to have a guest on and either somebody who has worked on a comic or, mostly we just have people who've been on worked on a comic. You're probably the only guest that we've ever had on the podcast who isn't directly related to comics, obviously besides maybe Andy. But for me, he's such a comic head that's so
Andy is someone who goes to a comic book store. I think I've been to 2 comic book stores my whole life. And I both times did not walk out with comic books.
I love it's one of my favorite things to do. It's such a treat for me of just in the middle of the week, just being able to go down there and just look at what's on the shelves. And obviously it's not the cheapest of hobbies.
That's why I don't do it. Because every cent I've made in 6 years has gone to this.
Yeah. And so it's fine, it's just one of those things that's always going to be there. It's not, as an industry, it's not seen anything worse than anything that's currently happening within it, so it's not going anywhere. My biggest gripe with Marvel movies and the comic book movies, and I wish more people talked about this, but Marvel never did so the thing that made the MCU so popular was the fact that it was interconnected and the Easter eggs. Those were the things that people really loved about them. It dawned on me 6 months ago that I'm they never made, and maybe they did, but they should have done comic book runs in between each movie where you got to see the characters interacting and then having other villains. Because one of my least favorite things about comic book movies is that you take a Spider-Man or a Batman and they have 60 years of experience, and then you have to somehow wrap that up and give him a successful arc within 3 movies, So it's why would you not go back to your initial the foundation of who you are as a company, what has made you this successful,
the books,
and champion them. And not saying that Marvel Comics isn't doing really cool stuff right now, because it is, but they could have really helped the industry as a whole, because people would have went to their local comic book shops, which again, that's where they should be, trying to support, because that's where they started. That's the reason that people like these characters, is because somebody saw them in a comic book at one point in time,
I feel like Marvel and DC have kind of I'll put it in wrestling terms, but I feel like they've become the WWEs of the world. And then they're well, what made us is the independent scene, where all these people are working for almost no money and struggling to keep the art alive that made our art, but we're already at the top and kind of fuck it. You know what I mean? If you look at it with Marvel, at one point, they sold all of their rights to all of their characters to a whole bunch of different people. And because they were going broke, and then essentially them selling off those rights then got them into different medias and platforms. And then they're oh, this character's going to get a movie now. And then that ascended Marvel even more. And now they're at a point where they're all becoming conglomerated. And we're now kind of getting the point of the Marvel universe in the movie wise, where we should have been from the beginning, where now characters, essentially they made movies based on characters that they had to use at the time. They're well, we have the Avengers, but nobody really cares about the Avengers unless you have Wolverine or Spider-Man in it. Nobody really because they rather watch the X-Men, or they rather watch Spider-Man, and we don't have that. So they built the universe around characters that were kind of new to the most general public.
So here's what I'll say about that is, again, isn't it interesting what you can do with a story?
Yeah.
So it's you take these characters that people said that, that was the general consensus of people don't really care about these characters. They were kind of B-list or, even lower tiered list characters. And then they're literally the biggest characters in the world,
Now, yeah.
in like the history of art, these characters will be immortalized, which is insane. Like, and I'm not saying that as a comic book fan. I'm saying that as somebody who, like, Beyonce is going to be immortalized,
Yeah.
like, as long as we have history of stuff, she'll be a part of that.
Do you
And
think?
so will
Do you
the
think
MCU.
like? Do you think most of the MCU characters, like not, I won't say Spider-Man, but like Iron Man, I would definitely say Hawkeye, I would definitely say Black Widow, Captain America to an extent. I mean, he was big, but he was never like in the comic wise treated as well as like X-Men or Spider-Man or stuff like that. But do you think they've made more as characters being in TV and movie than they ever have in book form?
Like, financially?
Yeah. Do you,
I mean, probably, but I mean, that's so. I mean, it's hard to say. You'd have to know how much like that particular character is made versus all the comic book sales. I mean, it would probably be close, but obviously the rampant success within a shorter time period versus like,
yeah.
I mean, somebody like Spider-Man has always been successful.
Like Iron Man was never treated that like as much of a.
But again, like, look at kind of what I'm saying again is like comics were to some degree the acoustic solo act of like entertainment. And then they became a band when they got connected into movies. They were able to get in front of the more general public, which is what they were aimed. I don't think that comic books were aimed at the general public necessarily. I think they had them in mind, obviously, but I think movies in general, if to something like that, has to have the general public in mind.
Yeah, like kind of like when Stephen King writes a book, I think now he kind of goes into writing books being like, what if this was made into a movie? And I think comic book kind
I
of
think
got
everybody's like
yeah.
that. Yeah, and like I don't want to be one of those people that say that there's not good art out there. It's just harder to find because there's like an infinite amount of content,
Yeah.
And
everyone's rewashing the same stuff, and now they look at an industry like the comic book they're like, we haven't really done that. And if we done it, we kind of shit the bed on it because we took the idea of the character and then movie writers tried to make a script about a character that didn't connect with the people who read the book. Because we tried to change it too much to Hollywood it up. But if you kind of stick more to the base thing, it's going to translate well. And I think they started figuring that out with the comic book movies.
Yeah, I mean, Iron Man really, I mean, The Dark Knight ruins entertainment to some degree because it was such a phenomenon that, it was so good that it ruined everything else because everything just tried to be that. I think we're finally coming out of that.
Hot take, did not like the Christian Nolan Batman franchise.
Yeah, I mean, I think it'll age. We rewatched it sometime
for movies, great movies. But if you're a Batman fan and you're looking for a Batman movie, it doesn't feel like a Batman movie.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think maybe the newer one does. That one kind of feels more of like a policeman in hockey pads.
Yeah,
but
it's
again,
it's like a detective noir movie.
Yeah, but at the time, I think it was obviously it was revolutionary because everything wanted to be it for the next 15 years. And I think the MCU did a very good job of balancing with that with Iron Man, of being like, we're going to be a little bit more cartoonish and allow ourselves to slowly build in this stuff. And obviously, they got to a place where they're incredibly wacky or whatever. And yeah, and it's working for them,
Yeah. We do have some questions in the chat. Yeah,
sorry.
We do have some questions in the chat. So if people are writing in the chat, I am not ignoring you. But on the podcast form, because I do a lot of live stream content too, or I do interact with the chat more on a live stream level. But I am not ignoring you. If you do type stuff in the chat, I am reading it. We do appreciate it. If it's really funny, we'll put it on the screen. Like someone said about I follow Randy Marsh when we were talking about Lord. I thought that was funny, so I popped that up. But anyone who stopped in, subscribe the whole nine, thank you. Someone just said we hit 299 now. But one of the questions is, are you still writing poetry, and who or what do you draw inspiration from for your for most of your artwork?
Oh geez, I really go in and out with poetry. It's something that it hits me like a hunger of just being like, I need to like do this right now. And I'll like write little stuff in my book like from time to time. And I'm like at the beginning of the year, I was a lot more like into it, but it has been like a hot minute since I've been like very intentional about it, which bums me out because I really do like enjoy it, but I love it more when it like because again, like it's not something that like I'm not trying to be like the most successful person in the world as a poet. I'm just trying to be somebody who really loves poetry. And so giving myself that like space of just being like approach this like however you want. Because I think there is like I have things in my life where I'm a lot more like dedicated, specifically like my music career and my religious studies and those kind of things where it's like, no, this is something that you have to be intentional about and just give yourself to it, regardless of if you want to or not. Every time I play the guitar, it's not because I want to. It's because I have to be disciplined of just like I have to sit down and do this. And so with poetry, I like to treat it as like, yeah, just this thing that like comes to me because I do kind of think that that's like the best poetry of just like this poetry that yeah, just kind of rises up without it from within you and just being able to express that versus sitting down and just constantly writing. I think that is good to like help you like stay like mentally lubricated so that like you can have this ability. But again, at the end of the day, I'm just trying to be like an admirer of words,
Mhm.
like in the most like douchiest hipster way I could say that. But that's just how I really feel of just being like, it's so interesting to me. And again, this is even why I podcast or am just interested into it at general is that we can take words and just use them to yeah, just to paint pictures, to build stories, to like again, like there's that old meme of about a book of just like you're just staring at old dead pieces of tree and hallucinating. It's the
Yeah.
most interesting thing that like that we can do, that we as like a species as we've evolved, we're like, let's take these things that we say and like define them and put them into and like you can keep making new ones and just use them in any way that you want to. And so, yeah, I tried to keep I don't know. I kind of try to keep that like it's because I have such admiration for it as like a thing and I don't want to like it's not going to be my end all be all. And so like I just want to keep it as like this precious little butterfly that I'm just like I admire you and like when I want to sit with you it's like this thing that it's like
It's
treating
like a
yourself
treat.
to
Yeah.
yeah, it's a nice treat. And then like when I'm in it, like obviously when I wrote the books, I was dedicated, but a lot of the books came from like I just found that I had poems,
Yeah.
like when the soul meets itself was a lot more intentional. But uh yeah, it it was just like, oh, I have stuff, I'm gonna put it together.
How do you determine when you're writing or in the writing process of like this is a poem or this would be a good song?
See, I am much more free form in my poetry than I am with my music. And part of that is because of the genre that I'm in of just being like a folk musician. You're kind of very limited and I won't say very limited because there's people doing like really awesome stuff with the genre right now, but it is kind of still like you have a structure and obviously with any sort of innovation you're trying to build upon the foundation. And so you
Yeah.
have these things, you have like these specific chord progressions and all this stuff that you're using. And so to me, music is a lot more structured than again, just how I feel about poetry of how approaching it of just very much like a lover of just like
Yeah.
tenderly and I don't know, very like
Do you
the heart
approach
chakra.
both in writing process the same way? So you're like, okay, for example, your beautiful partner. You're thinking to yourself, I love her so much. I want to express it in words of a song or a poetry.
Yeah.
Like, do you come to the same thing of like, this is the idea of what I want? And then you have to break it down to like, do I want to put this in song form or do I want to put this in poetry form? Or maybe the way I could express it would translate better in poetry or translate better into music.
I feel like I rarely come to a project with an idea. Even when I'm writing, it'll start very just like free for me and go into whatever it's supposed to be. It doesn't have to necessarily be yeah. And I remember I read this again, like here's like one of the most hipster, like douchiest things about me is one time I
It's not
was
those
on,
hats hanging up.
yeah, not it's worse than that. uh One time, the first time that I was in India, I'm like, okay, I'm in India. What's a cool thing to do in India? And so I bought a Andy Warhol book at a bookstore, and I started reading it. I'm like, I didn't know Andy Warhol wrote books. Like, that's a weird thing. And the entire book was like, it was just he had put a recorder on a table and then just transcribed some of the conversations, but didn't say when a conversation ended, and just had like a long script of like just dialogue. And it was
Yeah.
like kind of in a play, but like nothing made sense. And so I'm like, I had two realizations in that moment of just being like, oh, all because somebody's famous doesn't mean that their music is their art is good. It just means that it's out there.
Yeah.
And the second thing is like, oh, well, then like art can be whatever, and especially words, like you don't have to be like, and I think that's why people like ask questions like, you know, for me, like when I think about poetry and songwriting, I think about the end outcome as two totally different things. Because I think a lot of people, when they think about poetry, they think about it in a song form of being like, I went down to the store, I don't want to go to the shore. They think of that as poetry, where for me, I think of poetry as just uh expression of just being able to put words in. And if you read my book, and this is, I would say, my one of my Achilles heels as a writer, is that I wish like spoke my poems out loud more, because they do just come out as more thoughts, where I would like them to come out more as like articulation of just. But I also have a lot of like, I'll be going on one thought and then just go to another thought and go within it, because I really appreciate, and one of my biggest like influences, ironically, in poetry is a writer named Connor Oberst, who fronted the band Bright Eyes, and his ability to write songs is so profound, of just being able to, yeah, utilize words. And he has this one song called The Center of the World, where the song doesn't repeat itself. There's no chorus. There's nothing really going back on itself. And he has all these different sections and all these different melodies of singing and all these different ideas that he's painting. And again, that I really love that, of just this ability to make a piece of art that isn't just chorus and verse and chorus and verse, which ironically is really how I write a lot of my songs. And so I wish that there was just more, you know, like wrenches being thrown in the works, of just
Yeah.
being like, this is kind of kicking things off, not normally how it's supposed to be. But that, again, all because it's not how it's quote unquote supposed to be, doesn't mean that it's not good. So for me, again, a song is a little bit more structured, and you kind of, I don't know, yeah, it's a more structured thing of, this is what it looks like for me. And I wish I was a little bit more freeform in that. But poetry, it's just all free form for me, of just being
Yeah.
like, let's not limit ourselves to, how many syllables are in a line or anything like that, or even a thought, let's just, and again, like what I loved about Connor Oberst was this ability to tell a story without really telling a story. And I think that's so interesting when people tell me that they love the stories in my song, and I'm like, there's so little storytelling. I mean, that's not true. There is a lot of storytelling, but also like, I love just statements in music. And I think that like, people think that music is just, again, like this telling of a story, but it can just be the telling of multiple stories that all mean one thing. And again, Bob Dylan was a master at this, and he has a song called "A Hard Rain's Gonna Fall." That's a there you go. So that's a lot of stories in that song.
Yeah.
But "A Hard Rain's Gonna Fall" by Bob Dylan is just him. Literally every line in the song is his idea for a song. and he's like, I saw a something something doing a something something. That's like the entire song is just 6 minutes of him just being like, I saw this happening, I saw this happening, this happened, and just being able to have this crazy ability to just think of all these different stories and these ideas and articulate them while still being like, this song is about nuclear fallout. You know,
Bob Dylan lyrically is fucking awesome.
mm-hmm.
I hate his delivery.
Mm-hmm.
I don't like listening to Bob Dylan.
Which to
like,
me, I always say that's the reason that he's the greatest songwriter of all time.
Yeah,
because he has the worst
Guns N'
voice
Roses
of all time.
took his song, and you're like, this is a masterpiece. And it's like,
Mm-hmm.
imagine if he just wrote for other people who can sing.
Yeah, and I mean, so Jimi Hendrix also took All Along the Watchtower, you know, and I mean, Blowing in the Wind is still, I believe, the most covered song of all time, which, and he wrote that in like 10 minutes.
Yeah,
which is insane.
Once again, sometimes people step in it, and sometimes people work really, really hard to find a pile to step in.
But so here's another thing: is he used to memorize sonnets in like what he would do is like, I'm going to read this poem and then recite it back to somebody one time, and it's like, that's an incredible brain, you know. And so, like,
but imagine he probably took 2 hours to write a song, and then no one fucking cared about it, and then he wrote one in 10 minutes, bullshit, and it's like, hit. You're like, fuck. You're like, my whole process of how I do this is now in my, at least in my brain. If I put all this work into something and then something else took off, that, like, it happens, right? Like, I put a lot of work into my podcast, and I'm very proud of my podcast, but then I go and do like a live stream where I fucking sit and watch wrestling, and it triples the views of my podcast. I'm like, oh, this is not what I want to be known for. Like, it's like, funny. Fuck. But those that content is, I feel, more about me, where the podcast is more about my guest, and I feel like I'm learning more to give myself more credit as the host of a pod. Like, I started this, and you know this more than anybody. My whole objective was to get my guest eyes on them, right? And I always made it about my guest, but then I had to learn that I had to make myself the brand, and I had to carry myself as the brand, because I always thought of it as a team. Like, my network and the people who were part of my other shows, like, we should all do this together, and they all looked at me as the leader, but I always looked at the content we were covering as the leader. And then I had to relearn, and that's why I came back with the ABJ of like, I have, like, people are coming more for me than they are the guests. And then when they come for me, they support me, and then they support who I support, because they respond more to me, that they want to go and support the people I care about. And that's where my content has taken a different leap and change, because now, before, when I'd have somebody on the podcast, they would like, oh, that was fun. But then now when somebody else comes on this podcast, they're like, yo, I got some new followers. People have been communicating with me, telling me they like my art. And I think that's where, at least as a content creator, like, how I know this, I went on a huge fucking rant to be like, how you change up your style because something different works, but it's not intentionally what you wanted it to be. But yeah, it's fucking insane. But folk punk, let's talk about this for a second. Folk punk. For people listening right now who are like, listen, I usually listen to ABJ because I like pro wrestling, and maybe I start bringing in musician people, and we mash everybody together and realize that no matter what entertainment people do, there's a story behind it. But is folk punk the style of music that you've always done? Was there other styles that you dove into previously and then found folk punk? And why folk punk as an so I'm hitting you with like 3 questions at one shot here. What is folk punk? Did you do any other styles of music besides folk punk? And why does that genre of music speak to you more than others?
Yeah. So I'm not going to answer it in that order.
No, I don't want you to.
So my first couple of bands were like heavier, and they were all like very screamy and breakdown focused, and like hardcore. Just, they were hardcore bands.
Yeah.
And I knew how to play keyboard, and I played keyboard in my first ever band, Spartacus You're So Cute, which was, we called a metal pop tech core band. So we really love the idea, again, of just being somebody I love, like, I mean, I'm surprised I'm not a jazz musician with how much I love, like, yeah, exactly. Like, of how much I love, like, just free form. You know, and then I picked a genre that is like, well, folk punk isn't a very confined genre. It's actually quite the opposite. But anyways, before I get there, And then I knew how to play keyboard, but it was just inconvenient to play unless like you had one at home, but you couldn't bring it out. You couldn't go to the park really with a keyboard or whatever. And so like I decided I was going to learn to play guitar. And so I started, I think at like 23, 22, something like that. And I'm 34 now. Um, yeah, and like it's just been the second that I started playing guitar, I stopped caring about heavy music. It was like I just turned like 40 when I like picked up the acoustic because I'm like, oh, this is all that I'm about now. It's just acoustic guitars. And I what's interesting is I feel like there was a very strong shift culturally in the underground around that time where a lot of the people who grew up in hardcore scenes like myself were still wanted to play music but just either couldn't do the hardcore stuff or weren't interested in it as much. And a lot of it was like people just kind of just having acoustic guitars around, and um folk punk I mean folk punk really rose up out of just fucking punk kids just sitting around doing hard drugs and playing the acoustic guitar, and it's become so much more than that. And it's such an interesting thing to think of because as I said earlier, like isn't uh, folk punk has become like what emo used to be. There was a genre of music at one point in time called emo, and that was a specific actual genre. And then emo became such a buzzword and such a big thing that, a band like The Devil Wears Prada and a band like Hawthorne Heights that aren't really, I mean, they're similar, but they're not really at the end of the day. One's a metalcore band, one's, post-hardcore band. And I mean, they've obviously changed a whole bunch since then. But again, it got lumped under this emo brand, which was more of a cultural thing than it was also music. There still retains a true emo music, but it is a dime a dozen amongst the actual emo like subcategory. You know what I mean? And so I guess the way of saying that is like it's like that classic like umbrella idea of like there is the genre of folk punk, and then like the umbrella would be I'm like very traditional folk. There was a time in I think either the 90s or the 80s where there was something called anti-folk, which was like very tongue-in-cheek folk music. It's folk music. It's arguable that like Woody Guthrie was a folk musician, a folk punk, because he just wrote about anti-establishment stuff, but the foundation of punk music just wasn't there. And so yeah, I am lumped in with the folk punk crowd because I know that like I'm just connected with that world because of my past and like the hardcore scene and just the friends that I've made through that. My music is a lot more like safe, borderline like folk music. If you like hear true folk punk music, it's very energetic, and I don't really have I have very like fun, like bouncy kind of like do 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 fun songs like that, which I love.
One of your songs was my intro music for quite some time.
Yeah, and I always
Medication.
appreciate that.
Yeah, I loved Medication.
It's a great song.
I wasn't even a pot smoker when I liked Medication. I was straight edge. I was a drinker.
Yeah, I was gonna say.
Yeah, I like pills too.
Oh, that's not good.
Yeah, listen, body pain happens, man.
Yeah,
that's why now I smoke weed. I haven't touched a pill in 4 years.
That's very good. I'm happy to hear that. But yeah, it's just been a very interesting thing because again, like I kind of said earlier, I think there was this time where the people that were in this hardcore genre just either they got back in touch with their roots of like being more appreciative of like what their parents grew up listening to, like all the like older country, like country that they would have heard just growing up, and just being like, oh, I bet I can do this and put that like punk edge on it, and it's really interesting to watch like country music or like acoustic music as a thing kind of become more popular and mainstream, because there is like a really, really big I would say still largely like underground scene of like what I would consider true country music being out there and being performed, whereas you see mainstream country music becomes too produced and too pandering, and honestly sounds like too much like rap. And not that I have a problem with either of those genres, but I don't think that it is what people think that it is.
Yeah, we like our generation is the generation who watched hip hop and rap turn into something completely different. And we kind of watched the parallels of rap and country at the same time. Like rap and country were very dedicated to who their audience were and spoke from a point to that audience, but wasn't pandering. And then when it became popular of what that genre was hot for, then it became, well, that's all this can be. And then it had to be pandering. We're in an era now where it's more pandering than it is feeling. And that's where it loses a lot of disconnect. And there's still artists out there who keep the tradition of that music alive, and it's still there. But if you're not hearing that on the radio.
Yeah. And obviously that's like the glory of the internet, is that people do have the accessibility to find those things if they're looking for them. But again, now you're just swimming in an infinite fishbowl of content and other stuff, so it is really hard. And like at the end of the day, I think there is like a lot of ways to like, I have some friends who just want like, they do just want to record and just put out stuff, and playing shows isn't the end all be all for them. But for me, like I love playing shows, I wanted to say more of this earlier, but for me, like sitting down, at the end of my life, one of the things that I will cherish most is all the bands that I've gotten to see that not everybody in the world has gotten to see, because at least I was there, and I'll be able to feel like I was a guy who was trying to support these people.
Yeah,
that's kind of one of my things. And it's, it sounds like very altruistic and like I'm trying to like toot my own horn, but I think you need to have things in your life that you're dedicated to. You can't be dedicated to everything. You need to be focused on some things. And for me, live independent like music is like the thing that I like, gets me more stoked than anything else,
Yeah, I totally agree. But like, I'll take it a step further. Exactly how you described that is exactly how I feel. Like I will grow up and be like, yo, you should have been there at fucking Pilguru when we were doing emo nights or funk polk nights, and it was just a room full of everyone that you care about that all supported that scene. And then like you even take it one step further, like this is the crowd that used to be at Trippin' Billy's, and then Trippin' Billy's closed down, and like the last night of Trippin' Billy's, like with gas station, Japan 4 ends Trippin' Billy's high gone. Like Trippin' Billy's was our CBGB. Like that was like our bar. Like that's where everybody went. And I wasn't even a huge part of that crowd. I came later and then found about the local music scene, went to like one of the last times ever at that bar. But like, that's a moment that nobody will ever have unless you were there, but it's special. I feel the same way about independent wrestling. I feel the same way about having a beer, like at Pilgrim, the craft beer scene. You have a beer that they'll make that after that's gone, you'll never have that experience ever again. And that was made with independent heart, soul, and blood, sweat, and tears. And that's the cool thing about the local local music, independence in general. That's why I love like just independent. Like I love the music, I love the art, I love the beer, the pro wrestling, like all of it. Like I'm just so infatuated with that whole entire scene, and it's just like it doesn't translate to a mass audience, and it's hard to grow being a journalist in this industry, but it's something that I think I'm passionate about, that I think people should know about it.
I just wanted to say that CBGB stands for Country, Bluegrass, Blues, and Crystals, or something like that.
The guy who ran it was Crystal.
Okay,
I think that was
now that I'm looking at it, I'm like, those letters don't match up. But it was a country bar at first.
It was supposed to be a country bar, and it turned into it was the birthplace of punk.
Well, yeah, and it's so yeah, I do think that like a traditional country music, like, and punk music has very much like similar like when people heard Johnny Cash for the first time, and I feel this way about when people heard how people talk about like Woody Guthrie and Hank Williams, of just like these guys were like outlaws, and then you hear the recordings and they're just like and like granted, like you don't get like Johnny Hobo and the Freight Trains without Johnny Cash, without like this super ramped up like, and having, I mean, you don't get like you don't get Johnny Hobo without Johnny Cash or CBGBs. You know, like it's this it built upon itself. But I'll see like pictures of Hank Woody Guthrie, and he's just like covered in sweat and whatever. And I'm just like, he's only covered in sweat because they don't have air conditioning. It's not because like he's just like he's not like, I mean, he is playing his heart out, but like again, you listen to those old recordings and they're not shredding, you know, but like people heard it and they were just like, my God.
You know what's crazy too? When you think about older music, sorry to cut you off, but you like think of the Beatles, right? And you when you think of the Beatles, you think of
Boodles.
Well, you think of Wembley Stadium, you think of, you know, selling out the stadiums and the people chasing them on the streets. But I think a lot of the heart and the soul of the Beatles is like their first time on live TV and the dive bars they played at. When people are like, yo, this is a bar that the Beatles started, and you see that thing, like that's essentially independent, the lifestyle blown up to 1,000,000 degrees there. Like they were one of those first bands who, like, you can say like they weren't put together by a studio and it was like this guy and this guy and this guy. Like it was that scene. Like when you talk about like Motley Crue, like people are like, yo, when they were at the Whiskey A Go Go, like people talk about their independent days and they kind of almost forget the fact that they're selling out arenas 20 years later.
Yeah. I mean, it's just it's always a super interesting arc for like anyone that's like super successful. And like for me, like I'll just admit that like I don't want to, like, I think that being a like full-time musician means that you sell yourself to the road. You either sell yourself to the road or you sell yourself to content. And I really don't want to be married to either of those things, but I want to be able to.
For me. I do one and I want the other. I want to be on the road,
and that's great. And like we were talking about it a little bit before of just being like, that needs to be that sold outness to it, of just like you can't like pussyfoot around it. You need to like just want it. And like for me, it's not I've said this multiple times for multiple years, that the biggest thing that I want is just to be asked to play shows in different spots. And I'm like finally getting there, like finally have people like reaching out to me and like, hey, you want to come play Philly? Hey, you want to come play like New Jersey? Whatever, you know? And so that's like for me, I'm just being like, all right, cool. I have achieved everything that I've set out to. And like, not that I don't think people should aim higher than that. I've just known for me is I just want to stay as grounded and into this thing independently as long as I can, because like I have it. For me, my favorite thing about going to a show is just walking around and talking to people and like meeting people. So even like bigger shows of like where you have to like buy a ticket and like queue in line and stuff, like that's so unappealing for me, of just standing there like cattle, of just like I'm just consuming this thing. But and not that I think that that's wrong, because that is like such a like, even I'll even say it's a religious experience, because you are just enraptured in this whole like phenomenon.
You feel more energy. You know? The energy of a bigger crowd is unparalleled.
It's undeniable.
I can get that energy in a room full of people I truly love. Also doing that same bit you said, walking around, and it, like I honestly, I'll be standing next to you for like 2 songs and feeling your vibe and dancing with you, and we kind of shuck a jive, and then I go over and I stand with like Amber, and then I have a completely different experience. And we like, that's the beautiful thing about our local music scene, is like you kind of bounce from person to person and you all take in the songs and the moment of that independent show with different people the whole time. Like at least that's what I do, and I feed off that so much.
And I would imagine that like people who are successful, they have that experience with like meeting new people behind the scenes and like all that kind of stuff. And I would imagine that that's how that works for them, of just like that camaraderie back there and like all that fun stuff. And just essentially, you know,
I can agree with that with pro wrestling 100%. Like same exact thing. Yeah.
And so, but for me, I've just, it's, I don't know. I will always be, and again, this is like probably the most folk punk thing about me, other than like some lifestyle choices, that I just will always be a sucker for acoustic guitar in like a living room. And like, again, I know that like makes me a hipster, like douchebag to some degree, but like, I think it's just like the most beautiful thing of just, you know, and again, like going back to poetry, of just being able to like the arts, you know, any form of just like, let's just sit down and like talk about this and discuss this, and like just having that space for people to express themselves and to be vulnerable. And like, again, this is going to sound like super ego, like just whatever, of like the desire to make music has come so naturally to me that it's not like, I won't say it like the skill has come naturally to me, but that desire has always, as long like since I'm like 14, 15, it's the only thing that's like been like super consistent outside of like the spiritual stuff. And
Yeah.
that's, those things aren't too far off, but yeah, it's just this thing. And again, I don't ever want to hate it. And I think that that's something I see with like a lot of people that do gain success within their thing, of just being like, I'm resenting sitting down and doing this thing. And at the end of the day, I don't think that that's, I don't want that. And I do have that, you know, like there has been periods of time where I look at my guitar and I'm just like, oh, I hate you because you've of all the like, you know, organizing shows and all this stress and like all this self put on pressure to like, and here's the thing, as an independent artist, like no one's like telling me to put out an album. There's no record label like being like, hey, you have to do this. I do have people who obviously want to hear new music from me, but I don't have a fan base who are like, and we'll get into that. Let's get into that eventually. But like, yeah, it's nice to have not have that pressure, but it's also like damning because then when I first started making when I first started playing guitar, I taught myself guitar for a year and then I started writing and recording albums. And I probably shouldn't have done that because I should have learned to become a better songwriter first. But it put a lot of pressure on me because I put out, I think for 4 years in a row, or at least 5 years in a row, I put out 4 albums. I put out 2 as Timy Mengle and then 2 as Churches and Trains. And then I just stopped and then took a couple years off, put out some EPs and then did another album because I was like, no, I learned that I'm like, I just want to sit with these things and not have it be like this pressure that's sitting over me. And at the time I was trying harder to like, be more successful with it, you know, like when I was younger, I wanted, I had to be to get to the place now where people kind of know me within like the tri-state area. Like I'm not the biggest act by any means, but like I know them. I'm friends with them, you know,
Yeah.
not all of them, but like, yeah. So that's like, and again, I don't want anything more than that. Like I'm super happy with it. I do wish like obviously like at the end of the day, like if it paid the bills, like just being able to like bounce around all these places, like it would be my job, you know, 100%. But it just doesn't work because and like and that's the path that I've chosen and uh, the way that I've chosen to take this, you know.
Mhm.
So anyways,
Yeah, well, I think that's a huge reason why I respond very well to you is because you understand, like we both have the same dream and the same wants, and boy, I would love to make money off my art, but I feel like you have that where I really, really hurt and stress myself out mentally and physically to grind and push and push and stay consistent. And you're more like you're consistent on your own terms, and you do like I said, you're more like you said earlier, you're more grounded and you ground me when I'm around you. Like I kind of like I reflect more. I'm like, I just slow down a little bit. Like enjoy what's around. Like and 9 times out of 10 when you show up, like I might be at a bar and Pilgrim was kind of that place that kept me grounded too because of that crew and that environment and the people who are there. Like I
mhm,
walk into that place and I immediately I'm not the guy who travels all over the place and does pro wrestling content. I'm not the guy who's live on my computer because realistically, like most of my audience who watches my content aren't in our area. I don't have a lot of huge local support when it comes to my podcast. People see what I do and they appreciate it and they like it, but they don't really listen to it because
right.
9 times out of 10, I'll walk into a bar and they'll be like, yo, man, I love what you're doing. I'm like, cool. What was your favorite episode? They're like, well, I don't actually listen. And I was like, appreciate that. That
Yeah.
that
It
feels
is
great.
like
Yeah.
it is a double-edged sword because you know I would obviously love everyone in town to like listen to my music, but I also like understand that it's not for them. And
Yeah.
it is like it's I would and this is kind of how I approach Pool Box Pals of just being like, I'm just gonna let this grow organically
Mhm.
instead of kind of pushing it on to the people that I know personally and being like, can you come and like because I have to do that already with my music of being like, hey, and I think that that's why you've seen more success, because have intended of like casting a wider net of being like, let's see what's out here past kind of what's just in Schuylkill County,
Mhm.
And so I'm trying to do that with, I wish I was better at that with, like, for me, that would look like posting more content on TikTok and Instagram on my churches and trains stuff, because I do get like good interactions from there from people that I don't know. Um, and so the
I
problem
can tell
is,
you how to do it, but you're gonna hate the answer.
see, but I at the end of the day, it's like I don't I want to push as like a punk adjacent musician. I want to rage against the machine,
Oh,
and
me too.
part of the machine is this algorithm.
Yeah,
And so like,
literally, it's me countless hours joining people's TikTok live streams and just talking and putting myself over and having conversations with people. It's live streaming absolutely nothing just to get your name out there and get those reps. It's
mhm,
going to other content creators and just be like, hey, you want to collab one day, or you're live, can I come in and join, and just join a live and then meet new people, and they're like, yo, I like that guy's vibe. Or Reddit threads or Twitter posts of just being like, I do this as well if you want to check it, like that stuff. And that
yeah,
fucking sucks and I hate it. But
yeah,
that's how I'm getting the traction I'm getting, because like
yeah,
I'm putting in, if I'm not at a 40-hour week job, my lunch breaks, my ride home, like every second I'm putting some, at least like, if there's 5 hours available in my day, probably 3.5 here and there, bits and pieces of me. Like when I pick up my phone, I'm not doom scrolling. I'm like, oh, that's somebody. Like, hey, I do, like, I'm
yeah,
constantly working, and it's a lot. And that's the only way it really, like, I feel like it's the only way that gets done. And I
mhm.
wish I can kind of sit back and let it happen, but I'm just also too invested to just kind of wait. I don't know, because but anyway, yeah,
You need to put in your, 100,000 hours or 10,000 hours, whatever,
I
10,000
feel
hours.
like I've been doing a lot. I don't know how close I am to that, but it's got to be.
But here's the thing, man. As like somebody who's like in the music world, I laugh at the idea at the is it Grammys, the music one, when they have
Yeah.
best new artist, because people have been listening to that person for a decade. But
Yeah.
like, like, so there's no such thing as the best new artist. It's only new to a general
Because you
thing.
just figured it out.
Like,
Yeah.
and so unfortunately that's you, there are like people who do just like post one video and then their success, and then but can they maintain that is the question, and then like what becomes of them as an individual of overnight success, you know and so like I think it obviously is a slow burn, but it's the only way up the hill,
Yeah.
unfortunately, that
Totally
like
agree.
is, yeah, of worth anything.
So
um
we are over the hour mark, and I definitely do want to touch more on pool box pals. So the idea of a pool, right? So we're gonna really break this down and dumb it down so the
let's do
audience
it.
can really get the idea of the content you're making now. A pool is essentially when you go to your local comic book shop and you make a list of the comics that you want, and they pull them for you. They put them in your little folder at your comic book store. You come in, buy them, take them home, and that's your weekly pool.
Yep.
And the crazy thing with comic books, and I almost said to you, like, I can't believe how you do this, because I tried and couldn't. But I also look at it from a retrospective of a pro wrestling fan, where I watch 4 different companies and 50 different independent companies, and I can keep track of every story, and even someone's story that's different as a performer somewhere else under a different name, and I can memorize that and track it all down. But like when you go get a pool, you're getting 5 or 6 different comics every week, because comics don't come out on a weekly basis. Sometimes you don't get the next story for a couple months.
So
Like,
do you see
how
that
do you
rack back
maintain all
there?
those stories? Yeah.
Those are all the different comics I'm currently reading. So if you, I mean, Andy gets like all that in a week,
Oh, Andy's
but like,
insane. Yeah.
yeah, and it's I it's it's not that easy, and it needs to be good, and that's like what it ultimately comes down to, is like there is a lot of comics that I read, and like even the comics that I love, I don't remember every detail of, just because there is a lot, and there is like with comics, there's a lot of like subtle details, and like you're reading a narrative, and so there might be a detail that's put in that you didn't even know was important until book 4, and then you're like, oh yeah, they did mention this thing, or they did make that movement, or whatever. um yeah, so it's it's hard, but like the comics that are good, like, yeah, I'm Jones and I'm waiting for them to show up in my pool box, you know? So,
Comic books to me are kind of like sometimes with TV shows, I will wait till the show's done and then go back and watch the show
mhm,
so I can watch at my own pace and I don't have to wait for the next one. If you're in the world of comic, so I'm gonna really dumb this down. So I'm gonna ask as if I don't know, but just
that's fine.
we're gimmicking this. All right. So if I'm that type of comic book reader, if I don't want just to go out and buy every single issue, what do I do?
You get trade paperbacks, which I don't think I have any that you can see. I do have them on the not on the floor, but
Don't they
on a
also call
lower
them
shelf.
compendiums sometimes or
Yep. So
yep.
just any like collection of comic books of, putting them all together into one, just kind of read through. Actually, well, I have one over here, but it's under a stack of a bunch of singles, and I don't want to try to move it and drop them all.
Yeah.
But yeah, so those are really nice treats, and like honestly, they are like, unless you decide that you want to do the single issues, I think they are like one of the best ways to consume comics because
Mhm.
you can just kind of plow through them without like that, like kind of waiting. I like the waiting period a little bit of just being like, it's like a nice little treat for me, of
Yeah.
just
Well,
like,
you were also at that point too, where like, say if I'm just trying to think, like if when The Walking Dead was hot, and we did a podcast on The Walking Dead, where like, why am I even? I do this pro wrestling every
mhm,
week. I watch Monday Night Raw, and then we watch it, and then we fantasy book how we think they can go here, and why this story means so much to us. And did you notice that move? Comic
mhm,
books are the same thing. Like your podcast. If someone's like, I want to get into comic books because I like the Marvel Cinematic Universe, or maybe I want to step away from superheroes and I want to see what else is out there in a comic book world because maybe I consume comic more than I consume physical books because the pictures do help. Um, like your podcast can maybe turn you on to a newer style book that's maybe not something you're going to get in the general pop culture sense. Like you guys do read Star Wars books, you guys do read comic books that are superhero based, but you also read other style of books as well. Like there's a variety of what you guys cover. And the cool thing about your guys' show is you are live and it is live. So someone can join in and say, well, this is something I pulled this week, or you're interactive on your social media for people to go join and be like, well, this is my pull box. And you have that platform for your audience. So that's kind of like my selling point of why I think people should go check Pull Box Pals out, and maybe go support your local comic book store, or you can get them from Barnes and Nobles or Amazon, or if you want to get a cold compilation or the whole book full of a previous one and go talk to comic books with people. It's a lot of fun, and it's a fun art form that I think has died because of the form of media or TVs or movies, because all of your favorite TV shows and movies that you probably watched in the past 10 years most likely came from a comic book.
yeah. And I mean, yeah, obviously just the instant gratification, instead of having
Yeah.
the discipline of just being able to wait a month, and
Yeah.
that's just kind of how it rolls. Or just it just takes longer to read a comic than it does. I mean, that's not true. It takes you like 5 minutes to read a comic, but it feels different than just sitting and watching a TV show, even though it
Yeah.
takes longer to consume one story. But
Now, week to week from your podcast, is there issues that you guys actively pull together? So there's like a few different books that you're on the same wavelength of like, what did you think of this story, and kind of bounce the idea off one or two different stories that arcs that are going, and then you have the ones that you read on your own and try to like not convince the other one why they like it, but more or less plug it. So like, is that kind of what's going on with the show?
yeah, I mean, we rarely ever are like, "Hey, are you gonna pull this?" Because I again, like one of my favorite things about comics is just like of just like what's showing up on the shelf today. A lot of people look and like know what's coming, and I'm not into that. So I'm like, we just want to go. I want to go into this with like, if we happen to be reading the same thing, that's fantastic. But um that we have like artists and like publishers and stuff that we both like really kind of seek after and like lean towards, but like we really have just gotten into like independent comics and like from the whole gambit, because I think, and this as like somebody who's in the independent wrestling world, is like there's independent and there's those people that are like the Image Comics and the like Dark Horse Comics or like IDW, where they're like kind of main known brands, but then there's the independent underneath them that are like people don't know their names, they're new on the shelf, and so there's tiers to independent stuff. And so it's nice for us to be able to kind of go the gambit of like, we've had plenty of people who've reached out and plug their new comic that they've been working on for 6 years or whatever, and just being like, can you please talk about this? And we're like, absolutely, we'd love to do that. And then we're also reviewing like Mark Miller, who is technically an independent comic book artist, but he's one of the most current like renowned comic book writers. So it's just interesting what the word like independent means. Again, it's just not mainstream.
So like an example of that, Andy Header, who has been a guest on your podcast, is your independent wrestler. Yes. And Deppen is more of like, he's still independent, but he's on a more of established brand of independent wrestling. Like he's on the brand right before you go to TV, and he's been in a company that has been like a TV company. So like that's kind of a different layer there. We're like in a different realm of like the wrestling that has connection between us, because we both know both those guys. But 100%. What are some? Well, here's a question, Timmy. Do you have any of the Fable series?
No, but I do know of Fables, but I've never read it. Again, like music and like comics, it's such an and we say this all the time on our comic book podcast, of just being like, there's so many comics. There's so many comics. Like every week, like just the amount that come out is ridiculous. And it's a shame of not being able to get to all of them. And again, like I don't even think that I'm that heavy of a comic book reader, if I'm being honest. There's people that like read so much more than me.
And there's even this question here, like it's a different layers. Like, how do you feel about webtoons, or do you prefer hard copies over digital? So webtoons are essentially online comic books because they don't have the money to distribute them, or they do, but it's not on a regular basis. I believe Lily does read a webtoon that is now published that you can pick up in Walmarts. I forget what they're called. I'm sure she'll say it, but like that's like, do you have any of those too, where you look at for webtoons, or are you mostly just the physical comic or digital? Like, is there a preference there?
No, I mean, like, and again, like it's just art. And like even like some of the comics that I've actually just read this comic this past week. I'll see if I can find it over here. That is there it is. Hold on. Sorry. No dead air. It's called Sunflowers, and like it's smaller than a traditional comic, and it's just an autobiographical comic about living with bipolar 1 disorder. And so like there's not really even like a firm narrative. There's just like this girl telling about her stories.
Art. That's a sick art.
Yeah. Like, and again, like comics can just be such a beautiful thing. And this is just an individual telling their story,
Yeah. The webtoon is called Lore Olympus.
Nice. Yeah. I'll check it out. Yeah. Cause I mean, I read things digitally, because I do have like some subscriptions to things like, oh no, I guess I don't, because Comixology got bought by Amazon. They shut it down, which is a real shame. I had that, and then that got ruined. But there's actually, I'll plug this. There's a comic book app that's starting called Omnibus. They're very small. They're very independent, but they've got really cool indie artists on them. Go check that out. I've been not working with them, but like we've done emails back and forth with them a couple times, just telling them how cool they are and stuff like that. So yeah, check them out.
What are some comics out currently that you are reading, or that you would recommend to the audience here today?
Oh my goodness. I mean, if you're just trying to get into comics, like into like mainstream like, if it depends on what you want, it's, again, that's so hard, because it would just be like recommend an album for everybody. And my album,
real quick, so I don't want to cut you off, but I want to kind of paint a picture here for the audience of what you're about to say, but maybe do something here. But comic book stores are not like, I guess you would think a comic book store is anymore. Like when you walk into your traditional comic book store, they're almost broken up by like a Barnes and Nobles, because comic books aren't just your superheroes and your this and your that. Like I remember taking someone to a comic book store the one time, like, oh, they have a whole horror. Like they liked horror. They like horror movies and scary, and they were reading scary books. And then like, they're like, I like true crime books, or I like more adult
I love
stuff.
horror comics. Honestly, like those are some of my favorite. Obviously, I'm not a like huge fan of like the super like just gory for the sake of gory ones, but like one of the best comics I read last year was a book that I always just sound ridiculous when I say the name, but it's called Horror. And it was just like a slasher film. And there's like and there's so like the book that's like currently above my head is called Dark Beach, and it's about there's like this artificial planet that shot away from our planet because the planet was dying, and it's a like detective story about figuring out what actually happened to the planet. And it's, it's not comic book, or it's not comic books, it's not superhero based. It's just a great story, like I do have like Ant-Man and stuff up there because he's my favorite superhero, but like a lot of those stories aren't about superheroes, like there's this independent one right here called King Ghidorah, which is just like it's a kaiju. It's just a Godzilla knockoff, and he's just eating pizza. That's what that's about. And over here
It's
is
my
that
spirit animal.
well, I mean, if you're into like one of my favorite comics that I've ever read is this one here called That Texas Blood, and it's a noir kind of like, I won't say supernatural, but it's like psychological thriller. It's such a good comic. So like it's so hard to recommend what people should read because it's such an infinite, like, again, do you like blues or do you like jazz? Like what are you into, or like and there's so many subgenres into things. So I mean, I would say, like, if you're trying to get into some of the Marvel stuff, just pick up some trade paperbacks. Those are the way to go. You can find a good trade paperback for $10, and then you just have a good story. Just sit down and think, look at it, and be like, what would you like? Do you like this art? Does it draw you in? Do you like this concept, this world? Whatever.
Yeah. How did you meet your co-host, and how did you guys start this podcast?
So we met in Taiwan. We were both in school over there together.
So insane.
And we were into comics over there, and we would download them from the internet and just read them together. And there was a couple places that you could get physical ones in English. Obviously, there was like a lot of manga like everywhere, but just couldn't read it. And so when we moved back to the States during the pandemic, we both started going to comic shops just to support like local businesses, and we would end up calling each other on the phone and just talking about how we, what we pulled that week. And then it just turned into, let's just make this a podcast, because we had both had our own independent podcasts. We were both, I can't remember if I was still doing Hireth when I started Pullbox Pals. I don't think I was.
I think you were in and out. You weren't fully in, but you still weren't giving up on it. Like, it's coming back soon, and then you start doing pull box, and you're like, it's over.
Yeah,
I'm
and
not
I also
doing two.
I mean, the reality is I would love to come back to something like that. But Hireth, I think that word really screwed me. I picked a bad name. I'm not good at naming stuff. That's kind of another
Pullbox
Achilles
Pals
heel
is
for
good.
me. Well, thank you.
Well, and then because I remember, and here's how I know that both of them were still alive, is because before the current Ben Frank connection, which is me and another podcast, we formed a network because they're helping me out in my times of need right now with no work or no job. But before that, I was kind of someone who I was the network, and I had my shows, but I had other people on, and I had both Pullbox Pals on Hireth. I had Welcome Back. I had a few other podcasters who were part of my network that I really responded well with, and I thought were good content people. And you guys were part of that. The old IWEP network. What a day.
Yep.
But yeah, so yeah, you were definitely doing both at one time, but then once Pullbox Pals became more weekly and you started becoming more consistent with Pullbox, then you kind of just like, I'm just gonna more lean there.
And honestly, like, I mean, the podcast, like the spiritual podcast, was just hard because I tried to speak to everybody, and it's also I would like to speak more currently about things that are happening in the world, but I also don't want to participate in the culture wars of things, and I think that is kind of how you become relevant, how you quote unquote become relevant, but I don't think that's true. And I think that everything, and I don't think that of like you, but I think that is kind of if you're going to be like someone who's talking about like how life is, or philosophy, or theology, unfortunately it just happens to be tied into like a lot of poor culture war things,
So what about this? I'll present something here to you. We kind of talked a little bit off camera. I have a new piece of content coming out that I'm still kind of working on my first guests and future stuff, and finding out what this piece of content is, because I do also want not only for it to be based in the idea of the conversation, but so like Banging Beers was a show that I used to drink some beers. But we would talk about it on a professional beer level. Like, this is the beer, this is how it's made, this is what a write up on it, this is what it does, this is what it tastes like, this is what we experience with it. And I want to do the same on the medical marijuana side. We're both very big advocates and users of that, but also I need the show to be more than that and a layer. So if there's ever a time that you're like, yo, there's a topic I want to talk about, and I kind of want to just smoke a couple and get on a camera and bullshit, I would love to have you on Blazing Buds and come and get that off your chest. And it could be any topic. You know, I feel like we have really good conversations, and I think that would be a platform that people would enjoy.
Yeah, I would love to do that, man.
Yeah, and obviously Not Cool in High School is built for you as well, with the comic books and movies and stuff like that. We can always do that. So there's plenty of ways that you can, without starting a whole new podcast, where you can kind of come hang out with me, and then I have an excuse to hang out with you, my bud.
I appreciate that. I need to take you up on that for sure. But before we wrap this up, can I just quick promote my my band's doing a little tour next week?
Well, before your band, let's I just want to say one more thing. When are Pullbox Pals episodes going live? Where can you find them? And what days can people expect to tune in to watch the live experience of Pullbox Pals?
So we are live every Wednesday at 3 p.m. Pacific time and 6 p.m. Eastern time, which is the time that I'm in. And then, yeah, that's every Wednesday. So you can just follow us on all the social medias. We're on TikTok, we're on Twitter, Facebook. Everything is just Pullbox Pals. So go look that up. We're most active on Instagram, so go over there if you want to engage with us the most. But yeah, we do post videos on TikToks that like just little clips from our shows. I edit those, and they're a lot of fun. But yeah, if you're into comics, or just have enjoyed hearing me talk and would like to hear more of my voice, come on through. And there you go, you found us. Yeah,
all links are below for their social medias, as well as where you can find.
So yeah, please subscribe. We just hit 200, so it would be nice to just keep rocking and rolling in the free world.
There you go. Now, Tim, is there anything else you'd like to plug or get out there to the people?
Sorry, bud. We just have this a tour coming up next week, and I'm super excited about it. And I don't want to, not put that out there, because got to do my due diligence to all the people who've helped me set up shows. So we're doing a 5-day run next week, starting on Wednesday here in Pottsville, Pennsylvania. We're going to be playing at Pilgaroo. I'm going to be doing these first 3 shows with a guy named Greg Reckus, something like that. He's from Canada. He's on tour. He reached out to me and asked me to hook him up with this Wednesday show. And so I was like, you know what? I haven't done like a little tour in a long time, so I'm going to set this up. And then I just got some other shows, and I ended up just kind of riding his coattails for 2 of the shows. So Wednesday, March 13th, we're going to be at Pilgaroo. March 14th, we're at the Goat on Main in Stroudsburg. These shows are all in Pennsylvania, and that was my dog, if you heard that. And on Friday, the 15th, we're going to be at Do It Now Screen Printing in Philadelphia. And then the 16th, I'm in Art Altoona in Altoona. It's Art Altoona Center or something like that. I'm playing with a guy out there called Kevo Can't Dance, who I haven't seen in years, so I'm super excited to see him. I'm playing with like a bunch of great acts down in Philly, playing with a band called The Looms, my friend Eric. Yeah, so super excited, because and again, like, one of the reasons I love touring is just getting able to see all these people. And then that last Sunday
show, these people need places to get their art out there and talk to. You should send them to ABJ, because I'm looking at my board, and I do have a lot of musicians and podcasters coming up, as well as wrestlers. I want to definitely, now that I'm back in the swing of things, I want to open my doors more to not just the pro wrestling scene. I want to give everybody an opportunity.
Nice. Yeah, I'll definitely do that. And then the last place on the Saturday the 17th is Sunday the 17th is with is with Billy Trey. Billy Trey is also playing, but it's at Curry Donuts in Wilkes-Barre. And so check out Churches and Trains.
How did you get a show in a Curry Donuts?
I know the people there's some dudes that work there that have just been hosting shows there for years.
That's awesome. So, it's kind of like the Denny's thing. Like, we're here to fuck you up, Denny's.
Yeah. So it's really cool. I love those guys. Shout out to George and Cody because they're awesome dudes. So, and just everybody who's helped me out. So, oh, there you go. That would be awesome. Yeah, like I said, check it out at Churches and Trains. Yeah, our music's on all of the streaming platforms. Here's what I will say is I've recorded everything that you've heard and all the instruments that you hear on these things, and it's not as good as it could be, but go ahead and give it a listen because there's definitely some spirit there. But this is the first time that I've really talked about this publicly. I figured I'd give you a little bit of a sizzle. But
Exclusive.
Churches and Trains is hitting the studios within the next couple of months to record something. So
you're gonna record it with the full band.
We're going to record it with the full
who's
band.
all in the full band for people?
So the full band is going to be me, Steve Mazer, and a buddy of mine named Morgan. He's a local teacher. I don't know if he wants me giving out his full last name, but
no, that's fine.
Yeah. So yeah, and then maybe some other people. I'm still trying to see what I can do, but yeah, we're going to be releasing something. There's a part of me that wants to go back and re-record like a lot of my old albums, or at least like take songs from my old albums and then like redo them in a proper studio setting. But I just kind of want to get this new album out first and just have it be a completely new thing. And so I think the thing that we haven't even recorded it yet, but the songs that we've written for it, I'm very proud of, because everything else that I've done before musically has mostly been about romance and about love. And this album there's a lot of stillier songs and very like politically driven and like social commentary songs, which I'm just proud of, because I pushed myself to not just be like, oh, I'm sad, because I'm not really. Like, I mean, I still struggle with stuff, but like I would be singing about heartbreak that doesn't exist anymore, you know?
Yeah. Well, I recently, and we'll end on this note. Recently, I was when I go pick up Lily to come hang out, she comes up and we do some like art, and she does her stuff. She does crocheting and projects and stuff like that.
Nice.
And she helps with logos. She's awesome. And when we were doing wrestling shows, she would help film stuff and stuff for me. But on the way back because like an hour drive up and an hour drive back, I had her listen to Churches and Trains. And I also had her listen to Beelzebub and the Screaming Demons.
There you go.
Beelzebub and the Screaming Demons.
Yeah.
She was a fan of both. And I was like, these are probably like, this is just a taste of our local folk punk scene. Like, but we have a really big folk punk scene in Schuylkill County.
I mean, honestly, Pennsylvania is one of the best folk punk scenes in the country. Yeah. One of the like most popular current folk punk bands is called Apes of the State, and they're from Lancaster. Oh, wow. And yeah, and Philly has a really big scene. So I've been very lucky to be a part of like a lot of what goes on. Not a lot of, but like be a part of things that happen down there. And yeah, there's such a good folk punk scene in Philly. So shout out to the O Fox, the Looms, Proper Punctuation, Matt Charles. Like, there's so many good bands down there. And also like that's just in Philly. You also have Condition Oakland, Ted Hazard. Like, there's so many good people up here as well.
Oh, the list is good. The list is on and on. All right, well, that'll do it. Officially the longest podcast. I knew that was going to happen. Fucking knew it.
And we're trying to. This is us trying to keep it short.
This is short. Yeah.
Right.
But thank you guys so much for listening to the podcast. Make sure you check the links below to follow Tim on all social media, as well as Poolbox Pals, which is live every Wednesday at 6:00 Eastern time, 3 Pacific time. If also you want to support, there's merch below for ABJ Podcast. I just put a bunch of new t-shirts out. The one I'm probably most proud of is the New Japan spoof. So New Japan Wrestling has this lion, and it's a cool looking logo. It really, really is. But I spoofed it, but I also kind of it says on it's the King of Pro Wrestling, and I didn't want to refer to myself. I mean, I do have some t-shirts where I may take the crown of King of 570 a little bit, but I kind of went with something a little different, and this is it here, the Voice of the Indies. So that's the new shirt, and I'm from Monterey, which is Golden Bears, and every town is kind of broken up by their school, and I thought that was a cool little nod to be where I'm from. The background of this podcast is essentially Monty City, Pennsylvania. Like, I'm very rooted in where I'm from. And then we have the new merch out. 316 Day is coming. If you're a pro wrestling fan, we all know Austin 316. Our the Bible verse. I think that's where they might have got it from. But we have the ABJ 570 and the ABJ 666, and maybe there's one coming next month on the 20th. Who knows? Be on the lookout.
Who knows?
But a lot of cool stuff coming out. I just started doing Assassin's Creed Mirage streams, as well as playing Pokemon. So that's been going on, as well as we sneak in some Call of Duty every now and then when I don't want to do anything fun. We're live every Monday for Monday Night Raw, Wednesdays for Dynamite, Fridays for SmackDown. So there's a lot of fun things always going on the channel. We're brought back Not Cool in High School. Banging Beers is coming back. Blazing Buds is coming back. I'm pumping out the content because I refuse to lose. But we'll see you guys next time. Also, if you want to support the Ben Frank Connection, also is our network. There's exclusive ABJ t-shirts that you can't get anywhere else. So like, once again, that black and gold is my thing. We got some coal mining shovels. We got the Keystone. We got the Bear Paw, a little bit of everything, but exclusive merch if you're an ABJ fan that helps pay for things like StreamYard and keep things going for our network and our podcast. That'll do it for ABJ Podcast episode 115. We will see you next Thursday with the Brothers Gray, an independent tag team from the area. Can't wait for talk to them for episode 118. And in between that, we got a lot of other things, but we talked about in the front of the show. We'll see you next time. If you're watching this, make sure you hit like, subscribe, the whole nine. This is live pretty much every Tuesday and Thursday for the podcast, all social media to keep up with all that, as well as if you are listening to this on the audio platform, a 5-star review goes a long way. So if you're listening on Spotify, there is a Q&A of what you thought of the episode. Leave us a review there, and if any reviews come back, we'll read them on the next one. But we have a lot of cool stuff coming. I love you guys so much. That'll do it for us at the ABJ Podcast. Here's some music by the Converse Kid. We're out of here.
Thanks for watching this presentation. Like, share, and subscribe for more.